Hey class, we're in part 4, pricing, planning, and purchasing retail inventories. Retail pricing. A retailer must price its merchandise at the right price so that it can entice customers to buy while also covering its profit goals. Since retail prices become net sales, the higher the retail price, the higher the gross margin and the net profit. So let's talk about markup. You have your initial markup, your additional markup, and your cumulative markup. So there are two components to a retail price: cost and markup. So cost is what is paid to the supplier. It's basically the price before any markups. It can also be referred to as wholesale cost or wholesale price. Your markup is the amount that is added to cost to establish a retail price. So markup is generally expressed as a percentage. Keystoning is when you double the cost to establish a retail price, resulting in a 100% markup. So the formula to calculate your retail price is going to be to take your cost and add your markup. So here's the most common types of markup: your initial markup, your additional markup, and your cumulative markup. Your initial markup is a markup that is added to the cost to establish the first price at which the item will be sold. This is also referred to as your regular or your original price. So your additional markup is markup that is added to raise an existing retail price. Additional markup is expressed as a percentage. Your cumulative markup is an aggregate markup percentage on a group of goods with varying markups. So how do you calculate your additional markup percentage? You'll take your markup, divide it by the present retail price, and multiply it by 100. How do you calculate your cumulative markup? You'll take your total markup, you'll divide that by your total retail, and then you'll times that by 100. So what happens when stores are trying to move out slow sellers or seasonal pieces? In those cases, stores will mark down product. So markdowns consist of damages. Also, employee discounts are markdowns. You have promotional markdowns and also clearance markdowns. So markdowns are generally taken to move slow selling or end of season merchandise. Since items are sold at a lower than intended retail price, markdowns do have a negative impact on gross margin and net profit. So your markdown is the downward adjustment in retail price. This is also known as a price reduction. It is generally expressed as a percentage. So your additional markdown is applied to items that are already marked down. So essentially it's a markdown on top of a markdown. If you've ever been in a retail store, you've probably seen where you'll have a clearance section. And in that clearance section, it may say take an additional 30% off of already marked down prices. So that's an example of your additional markdown. It is also generally expressed as a percentage. So how do you calculate your markdown percent? You'll want to take your markdown dollars, divide that by your current retail price, and multiply that by 100. Now, how do you calculate your markdown dollars? So you'll take your original retail price, you'll multiply that by your markdown percentage, and then divide by 100. So markdown rate is a tool that is used to evaluate markdowns. The rate is calculated by taking the total markdown dollars for a period and comparing it to the net sales for that same period. So here's some of the most common types of markdowns. You have your damages, which are going to be your price reductions that are applied to damaged goods that come in from the vendor. Goods can also be damaged in the store by consumers, and retailers will also mark those down as well. You have your employee discounts, which is a price reduction on employee purchases. So if you ever work for a retailer or perhaps even a restaurant or a car dealership, let's say, they may offer you some sort of what they would call an incentive for working for their organization, where you can purchase either clothing items or whatever product it is that that business sells. You are able to purchase those items at a discounted rate. Usually, the intent behind that is to entice you as an employee to purchase the goods and to wear the goods or carry the goods, or if it's a car, obviously drive the vehicle in order to help them to entice other consumers essentially to purchase those particular items. So generally, it's between a 5 and a 50% discount that is offered to employees. You also have your promotional markdowns, which are price reductions on merchandise that is featured in a promotional event. A good example of this is your Black Friday sales. So you'll see promotional items during Black Friday, usually will last the weekend, but in some respects, specifically on Black Friday, you'll have higher savings. But after Black Friday is over and after that weekend is over, you will see that those items, the price is adjusted back up on those items. So promotional markdown is also referred to as temporary markdowns or sales. And then you also have your clearance markdowns. So these are going to be your price reductions to encourage the sale of residual or slow selling products. So these are also referred to as your permanent markdowns. Perfect prime example of this would be when you go to a retailer towards the end of a season. So right now you may experience a lot of retailers having some of their winter clothing at a clearance rate because they're moving that out as they have received their spring merchandise. So let's dive a little bit deeper into clearance merchandise. So consumers may be enticed to purchase items that they once considered not to be as attractive when those items are placed on clearance. So when items are clearance, generally the original and the clearance price is shown to display the value that the customer is receiving. Most clearance items tend to end in 99 or 99. So you might see a clearance item that says $19.99 or $24.99, for example. So discontinued merchandise is goods that will no longer be part of future assortments. So this can be a category, a product line, a single style, pattern, or color. Seasonal merchandise is the merchandise that is sellable only for a limited period of time. So again, you have your seasonal items or your holiday items. So every year around the holiday time, you'll notice that stores get specific items geared towards that season. Good examples would be your Macy's stores or even your Victoria's Secret stores. You will see that they have an influx of holiday Christmas items that they are selling. But after Christmas is over, any items that are remaining are generally marked down. Broken assortments are the remaining items within a set of related or coordinated items. So when these items become PC, they then become eligible for markdowns. So let's consider women's workwear. So let's say you have a blazer and a skirt and also a pair of pants. So all these items collectively are a suit, but they're sold as individual pieces. If the blazer sells out and the skirt sells out, the pants could essentially be marked down as a way to move that particular item out of the store. So your slow sellers. So some of the things that create slow sellers would be your weather. So for example, you could have unusual seasons that affect the sale of merchandise. Let's say there's a milder winter. This may call for a price reduction of heavy winter coats. A poor assortment will also lead to slow sellers. So when the product assortment is not appeasing to the consumer, it won't sell. Poor presentation. This is how the goods are displayed in the store, which can enhance their rate of sale. But items that are poorly presented may not sell because they're not enticing to the consumers. So it's really important on how you present those items on the fixture, how they're faced, how they're folded onto tables or hung, how they're sized and or colorized. Late delivery. So seasonal and trend sensitive goods have to arrive on time. Those that arrive after the selling peak become slow sellers. So a way to kind of combat that is a lot of organizations will place a do not ship later than date along with their order. So basically on their purchase order, it will have a do not ship later than a particular date. Maintain markup. So we're going to talk about tactical price changes and managing markdowns. So maintain markup is the difference between the cost of merchandise and the actual retail selling price. It's an indicator of how well merchandise sustains markup. So when goods are sold at the original price, maintain markup and initial markup are equal. Your gross margin can actually be determined from your maintained markup. You can get this by subtracting the transportation and the workroom costs and then adding in any cash discounts. So how do you calculate the maintained markup though? So you'll take your initial markup and you'll subtract your net markdowns. Tactical price change is a strategic markup or markdown that falls within a retail price zone defined at one end by a retail price with a standard markup and at the other end by a retail price with an inflated markup. You have your markdown cancellation, which is part of your tactical price change. This is a markup within the zone. Your markup cancellation is a markdown within the zone. Your markup cancellation is actually a reflection of the buyer's pricing strategy. Markdowns are planned and tracked over time. They can be done by department and or category of merchandise and the markdown type. Excessive markdowns will yield high sales, but they negatively affect your gross margin and your net income. So establishing an initial markup, factors that drive initial markup. So again, goods must be priced to ensure that they align with the retailer's profit goals. So how do they establish that initial markup? The things that they take into consideration includes your transportation, workroom costs, expenses, and markdowns. So in setting our initial markup, we must take into account the markdowns that we'll probably end up doing. So our initial markup must be high enough to account for possible markdowns that will affect our gross margin. Our initial markup also must be high enough to account for any transportation costs, such as getting your merchandise from the supplier. Also, it must take into consideration your workroom costs. So a good example that the book provided was a retailer who offers free tailoring or free alterations for merchandise. And then you also have your direct expenses that must be taken into consideration when setting your initial markup. So that could be jewelry boxes, it could be tissue papers, bags, or any other items needed by the retailer. So how is your initial markup percentage calculated? So to calculate this, you would need to take your maintained markup and subtract your markdowns, and you'll divide that by your net sales plus your markdowns. And then you'll times it all by 100. So in calculating your initial markup, you can use percentage or you can use dollars. So when you use a percentage, your net sales is always 100%. So calculating your initial retail price, you can take your costs and divide that by 100% minus your initial markup percent. Promotional pricing is a discounted price that is less than the regular price. Promotional pricing is conducted for the following reasons. So it generates traffic, it can stimulate sales, it can induce the sale of related non-promotional merchandise, it can engage in competitive pricing, and it can establish an image as a value-oriented retailer. So when promotional pricing occurs, book inventory adjustments are required. This is because a balance between the book and the physical values must be maintained. With promotional pricing, there are two adjustments that occur because it's temporary. So you have your markdowns at the beginning of the promotion, but then you have your markups at the end of the promotion. So you mark the merchandise down for the promotion, but then when the promotion is over, you have to mark the merchandise back up to whatever its cost is, or its price, I should say. It's a retail price, not cost. So your everyday low pricing is a value-oriented pricing strategy involving continuous promotional pricing without advertising. So such pricing strategy is used at Walmart, Target, you'll see it at Macy's. Almost every retailer nowadays has some sort of everyday low pricing strategy. So part of Walmart's everyday low pricing involves pricing their items ending in 47 or 86 or 97. So for example, in the image above, you'll see that they have a everyday low price of $3.47. So deceptive pricing. The Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, prevents unfair competition by protecting consumers from constraint of trade and deceptive advertising. In addition to FTC guidelines, each state has specific statutes that govern retail trade practices. So let's take a look at the different types of deceptive pricing. You have your regular price comparisons, your comparisons to competitors' prices, your lowest price, free merchandise, going out of business, your bait and switch, the rain check rule, and then you have predatory pricing. So, regular price comparisons are only legitimate if the price reduction from the regular price is based on the items being offered at the regular price for a sufficient period of time. So, what constitutes a sufficient period of time varies by state. So, each state will have their own guideline or explanation of what a sufficient period of time means. So, comparisons to competitors' prices. So, this is going to be where the price comparisons must be identical. So here's something to kind of visualize what the comparison to competitors' pricing kind of looks like, but more from the consumer side. So perhaps you're looking for a television, and so you've went to Best Buy, and you've also went to Walmart, and you realize that the TV is less at Walmart, but for whatever reasons you want to purchase the TV from Best Buy. Um, and so you speak to the sales clerk at Best Buy and you tell them that, you saw this TV over at Walmart and the TV is $50 cheaper. And so one of the things that they typically will say, okay, well, we do price match, but the item has to be identical. So then they will go onto Walmart's site and they will look up the product to make sure it's the same exact product with the same specs and everything. So your lowest price is when retailers must validate a lowest price claim with proof. So some retailers will claim to have the lowest price everywhere. So you may see, nobody can beat our prices. We have the lowest price guaranteed. Well, they have to validate that claim with proof. So free merchandise is an offer of a gift, is what most retailers will call it, that is temporary. So if it's not a temporary offering, then it becomes part of the everyday offerings and is looked at as a deceptive pricing. So then you have your going out of business sale. So businesses cannot establish themselves with the intent to have a liquidation sale. So many states actually require a business to operate for at least a year before they can hold any type of going out of business sale. And the reason being is so that they can eliminate those who may be seeking to open a business strictly so that they can turn around and have a liquidation sale. So your bait and switch is where a business will promote an item at a particular price to lure consumers into the store, only to then sell them on a higher margin item. So it is illegal to do a bait and switch. The rain check rule pretty much allows a consumer to obtain a rain check in order to purchase merchandise that was on promotion or being advertised at a later date, but for that same exact price. So the FTC's unavailability or rain check rule is a guide for how retailers should handle instances where advertised merchandise is out of stock. So one of the things that they can do is they can issue a rain check, which, as I kind of mentioned, allows the consumer to buy the item later at the sales price. They can also offer a substitute of a comparable value, or they can offer compensation equal in value to the reduced promotional item. Not many stores other than like your grocery stores, sometimes your electronic stores offer rain checks, or at least they don't advertise that they offer rain checks. It would be something that the consumer typically will have to look into and ask about at the retailer. So predatory pricing is a low price strategy that is used to put consumers out of business. In some states, this is actually prohibited. So your retail sales price maintenance and pricing. So retail sales price maintenance is when producers enforce the sale of their merchandise at the manufacturer's suggested retail price. So your MSRP. A lot of times when you visit stores, department stores in particular, most of their designer merchandise is sold at MSRP. Even for example, sometimes you'll see sales at Macy's, and when you kind of look at the fine print, generally designer labels are actually excluded from those sales because they have to sell that merchandise at MSRP, or they can only reduce the merchandise when the designer or the producer chooses to reduce the merchandise because, again, for example, perhaps it's a seasonal item and so it's now out of season and they're trying to move that item out of stock. So pricing has been referred to as a science and an art. So it's referred to as a science in the sense that the price is a quantitative decision based on numeric relationships among price components. It's referred to as an art in the sense that price is a quantitative decision based on intuition and creativity. So essentially, buyers really need to work within those two. They have to work within pricing being a science and an art. So they have to be able to look at the data and understand that relationship to determine what the correct price is. But at the same time, they do have to use their intuition, their knowledge, and their creativity to know essentially if and when they can even buy a particular item, if it's going to make sense by the time they mark it up to reach those projected profit goals. All right, class, so this closes out Chapter 12, Retail Pricing.